Halo Wars is a game near and dear to the hearts of many. Launching on the Xbox 360 in 2009 at the height of Halo's popularity and selling over 2.6 million copies. This is according to VG charts, so take this number with a grain of salt. When it was first announced, it was seen as an odd spin-off by many Halo fans, but real-time strategy fans were quick to point out that the game's developer, Ensemble Studios, were veterans in the genre, and that this was a sign that the game was going to be excellent. Then turning right around and getting pissed off when they realized the game wouldn't be coming to PC and would be an Xbox 360 exclusive. Truly, the game was an oddity, but one that many look back on with fond memories. But did you know how close this game was to not even being made? Not only did Bungie, the creators of the Halo franchise, not want a Halo spin-off game made, but most of the staff at Ensemble didn't even want to work on the game in the first place. The story of the game's development is as troubled as it is fascinating. When I first heard the complicated story behind the making of Halo Wars, I knew I had to make a video on it, so I could share it with more people. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like on the video, or better yet, commenting your opinion on it, as it greatly improves the video's visibility on the platform. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about Halo Wars. But before we can talk about Halo Wars, we do have to talk about its creators, Ensemble. Ensemble Studios, the creators of so many well-beloved real-time strategy games, Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, and this game. When they first began, Ensemble lived up to its name. The people who formed the company were extremely close-knit. The roughly 20 men who made up the founding crew were all in their 20s and single when the company was formed. They worked through the week, and usually, when Friday nights came around, they'd spend their time playing games together. And on Saturday, they'd all pick up six-packs and go over to someone's house to play some more. In order for someone to be hired on, they had to have interviews with all of the current members, and if even one person said no, that prospective hire was out. To quote Rich Geldrich, a graphics engineer for the company, it was a combination family / a little bit of a frat house. They had exploded onto the scene with the first Age of Empires game, which sold millions of copies for both Ensemble and the game's publisher, Microsoft, and their continued success led Microsoft to buy the small studio in 2001. However, after almost a decade of making similar real-time strategy games, the studio was starting to feel burnt out. Ensemble's management team planned a short retreat to regroup and figure out where they wanted to go next. The whole team was getting tired of making Age games. Some of the development team were getting tired of making RTS games entirely. They had been trying for years to get a second development team off the ground, but it just wasn't gaining any traction. At one point, a year into Age of Empire 2's development, they had to redesign the game from the ground up, and anybody working on a second project had to be pulled back into Age of Empire 2 to help prop the game up and complete it. At the retreat, the management team debated what they should do. They already had two projects in the works, Age of Empires 3 and a car action game titled Wrench, which nobody at the studio really cared for, and it seemed clear people wanted to scrap the project entirely. But it didn't seem like they could agree on what they wanted to create instead. There were three major contingencies forming. 1, they could make a Diablo clone. 2, they could try their hand at an MMO. And 3, they could try and make an RTS game, but for consoles? At the time, it was common knowledge that RTS games could not work on consoles. How would the controls make sense? Mice and keyboards were obviously better for RTS games. They would allow the player to zoom in and out quickly and select specific units more easily. The one leading the charge for the RTS game on a console was Angelo Loudon, a veteran at the studio, who truly believed that the concept would work and that Ensemble's track record with RTS games would lead others to believe that they could succeed as well. And since Microsoft was gearing up to launch the more powerful Xbox 360, he believed it would be a great place to publish the first good console RTS. At the end of the retreat, they decided to cancel the unwanted car action game and start working on all 3 new projects. They figured if Blizzard could juggle StarCraft, World of Warcraft, and Diablo at the same time, why couldn't they? It should be noted, though, that even at the time, they were still way smaller than Blizzard. It was announced that Angelo Loudon would lead the console RTS. Another veteran of the studio, Chris Rippey, would be the producer, and they put another developer in charge to discover how the game would play, Graham Devine. Divine has a really impressive resume, to say the least, getting his start in the industry doing programming for Atari, Lucasfilms, and Activision before co-founding Trilobite, which created The Seventh Guest, a critical darling which pushed forward the boundary of cinematic storytelling in games. He then went to work for id Software and worked on Doom 3 and Quake 3 before eventually landing at Ensemble, where he helped program the movement of AI in Age of Empires 3. Ensemble felt bad that for someone with Divine's track record, he was only programming AI. Dave Pottinger, lead programmer during Age of Empires 3, said to Divine, "Hey, we're not really using you properly at Ensemble. We'd really like to break this RTS on a console thing. How do you like to head up a team to try and get RTS on a console?" Divine said sure. The team that started working on the project, codenamed Phoenix, was small. Apart from Angelo Loudon, Chris Rippey, and Graham Devine, there was really only a handful of artists and developers. Devine used to call them, quote, "our team of misfits," and it didn't take long before they cobbled together a concept. Phoenix would have a sci-fi setting, pitting the scrappy armies of humanity against the hulking machines of an alien race, evoking H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And both the humans and the aliens would feel drastically different to play, similar to the different factions in StarCraft. The story was going to be the easy part, however. They knew that finding a comfortable control scheme would be much harder.
Video games have been around for long enough that pretty much for whatever game type you're trying to make, there's a control template that you can look at.
Chances are, if you're playing a first-person shooter, you'll push the left trigger to look down the sights. If you're playing a third-person action game, the left face button will make you do a dodge roll. But when it comes to making RTS games work on consoles, it hadn't really been done in a great way. They experimented with control schemes similar to Pikmin and Alien vs. Predator Extinction, two examples of RTS games with console controls, taking things they liked from each game and leaving out the things that didn't quite work. They would have mandatory play sessions every week and usually every day, forcing the small team working on Project Phoenix to take a critical eye to everything they had developed thus far and refine it even further. Eventually, they felt like they really had something. Now, they just needed approval from Microsoft. Every so often, Microsoft would send executives down to examine Ensemble's game prototypes, but they had never seen much value in them. However, Project Phoenix proved to be the exception to the rule. Dave Pottinger, who had been the lead programmer on Age of Empires 3 at the time, said, quote, "This was an interesting period of Ensemble, because it was the first second game that Microsoft got excited about. And, unfortunately for us, it was an RTS. We didn't want to get pigeonholed into just the RTS company, but of course that's exactly what Microsoft wanted. That's what we were good at, and that's why they had bought us, and that's exactly what they wanted us to do." Microsoft was ramping up production on the Xbox 360, and were trying to get as much ammunition as possible to beat Sony's PS3 in the upcoming console war. They were excited to have Ensemble as one of their flagship studios producing a game for their upcoming hardware, instead of making another PC game, which is what they were generally known for. The only thing Microsoft saw as an issue was that they were making a game with a new IP, which would make the game harder to market and more likely lead to less sales. And while the first official meeting between the Phoenix team and Xbox executives went really well, at the second meeting, Xbox dropped them a bombshell. If the team wanted to keep working on the project, they would have to make it a Halo game. At the time, the Halo franchise was just about the hottest thing around. Halo 1 and 2 had sold gangbusters, and Halo 3, just on the horizon, was one of the most anticipated games of all time. Peter Moore, who was the corporate vice president of Microsoft's Interactive Entertainment Business Division, said, quote, "We felt that Halo was IP that lent itself well to a real-time strategy game, given the way the universe was constructed. Good guys versus bad guys. All the stuff you needed in an RTS. And I think that probably the data and the evidence lent towards a lower risk opportunity in Halo than in a new IP." While this sort of thing does happen in the video games industry, even Star Fox Adventures was going to be a different game entirely before Shigeru Miyamoto saw a prototype for it and said, "We have a Fox character, use him." For the Phoenix team, who had already spent a year working on the original story and the universe, this was a harsh blow. Divine, who saw the world and characters as his own children, said, "When you're knee-deep in making your own IP, you love it. You really do. You love it. It's yours, and it's fantastic."
And it's not like they could just sprinkle some Halo flakes into the cake batter and then suddenly, bam, you have a Halo game.
It took months of work to fit the franchise into the game they had already started. Divine, who didn't know much about Halo at first, considered quitting Ensemble then and there. but instead, he sat down at his computer and started Googling all he could about the Halo franchise. Quote, "My view of Halo Friday Night was that it was a bunch of purple aliens that moved really fast in front of you, and you shot them. My view Monday morning was, boy, they put a lot of thought into this across a lot of years. Maybe there was something more to it than I thought."
While Phoenix Team's pride might have been hurt, they agreed,
and decided to transform the game into what would become Halo Wars. So, a few members of the team went up to Seattle to visit Bungie and talk to them about their new exciting project.
They were met with cold stares.
Chris Rippey said, quote, "We told them that we were going to be making the Halo RTS, and I don't think that any of them had any idea or any warning that this meeting was going to happen. And if you know any of the Bungie guys, they are very protective of their stuff, so I think we shocked them. I wouldn't say it was hostile, but the reception was cold. And it's not their fault. If somebody had come to us and said, hey, we're making the Age of Empires action game, we'd probably have the same reaction if we didn't know what was going on." In order to break the ice, the team did what they do best. They played games. They quickly set up an early build of Phoenix, the game they were now scrapping, and convinced Bungie that they were going to be able to make a console RTS that felt good to play. This cooling of tensions allowed Divine and the rest of the team to talk to Bungie's developers and learn as much as they could about the Halo universe.
When they got back to Ensemble, they had to start rebuilding the story for Halo Wars from scratch. The biggest hurdle they now faced was that everything had to be approved by Bungie.
Divine's team had decided that they wanted the story to revolve around the soldiers on a UNSC ship called the Spirit of Fire, and that most of the action would take place on a planet called Arcadia. All of these were brand new to the Halo universe, and Bungie got the final say on everything. The vetting process for story beats could take weeks to be approved, leading to a slow development process. Not only was Bungie literally thousands of miles away from the Ensemble team located in Dallas, but they were in the middle of making Halo 3, and didn't want to share much with the team, making what they considered a knockoff game in the universe they created with so much care.
Some of Bungie's staff would openly complain, saying they didn't want another studio touching Halo.
There was a quote flying around that they considered Halo Wars the whoring out of the franchise. Microsoft had finally greenlit Halo Wars by 2006, so Ensemble began to move some of its staff onto the project. But there was another problem. Apart from the small team that was already working on Halo Wars, the rest of the staff at Ensemble, which had ballooned to about 100 people and who had just finished putting long hours to finish Age of Empires 3, didn't want to work on another RTS game.
So much of the staff openly refused to work on Halo Wars.
Instead working on the Diablo clone and the MMO the studio had dreamed of starting 2 years earlier, and the attitude around the studio had started to suffer. Ensemble studio members began to joke that their name had become an ironic punchline because they had stopped feeling like an ensemble at all. They had become fractured, and while most of the studio should have been thrown into work on Halo Wars, the only game they had that was actually greenlit, most of the studio wanted to work on other projects.
And the attitude of the Halo Wars team didn't help much either.
The team, who was made up mostly of rookies to the studio, felt the older members of Ensemble looked down on them. Colt McCandless, who is one of the newer members working on Halo Wars, said, quote, "It was a lot of politics internal to Ensemble. We were like, fine, you guys move there and leave us alone. There wasn't a discussion. It was just like, no, we're doing it this way. If you don't like it, get out." Even worse, the studio heads in charge of making the MMO game that Ensemble was working on had suddenly announced to the rest of the studio that it was also going to take place in the Halo universe. They did this without consulting Microsoft or Bungie at all. They figured since it was helping the other team make a console RTS by adding Halo, maybe it would help them make the MMO they wanted. So, a lot of the studio staff was fragmented and sent to work on other projects which weren't even greenlit by Microsoft. Meanwhile, the team behind Halo Wars, which was expected to be the company's next big release, only had a team of roughly 25. And, in addition to the slow response time from Bungie, who didn't want them touching their IP, the small team had to deal with the extremely difficult process of coding the pathing in an RTS game. When you highlight a group of units in a game and send them off to another location, say to destroy something, the game has to automatically calculate the fastest path from point A to point B. However, this can change on the fly if a new building is built in the way, or something else is cleared.
Ensemble had been making RTS games for over a decade at this point, and had years of coding saved up from their game's artificial intelligence to detect the best path and react accordingly. But since they were switching to the Xbox 360, they had to use an entirely new engine, which not only lost them the years of previous work, but also meant that they had to learn how to recreate these systems entirely on the new platform. Despite these troubles, Microsoft was excited for the game, expecting it to be a big success. They revealed the game to the world on September 27, 2006, giving the game a release date before the end of 2007. To anyone with eyes inside the studio, however, this clearly wasn't a reality. One day, Rich Geldrich became furious because while the art team had been working hard, they weren't quite capturing the Halo aesthetic. He printed a whopping 400 full-color screenshots from the Halo games and plastered them all over the walls. Quote, "In the bathrooms, in the kitchen, the hallways, the meeting rooms, because I was pissed that this game didn't look like a Halo game." And a lot of skepticism was being levied at the game from fans, because how would Halo, a first-person shooter franchise, work as an RTS, which was completely different? And of course, many more people were skeptical that an RTS game would even work on a console. Graham Devine knew that the team had to create a perfect vertical slice of the game to present in E3 2007 to silence these fears once and for all. And while internally the game was struggling, Devine was able to throw a Hail Mary. The E3 demo looked really clean. Devine did the voiceover for the demo himself, and he did a great job.
Hello, my name is Graham Devine, lead designer on Halo Wars. I'm very excited to give you this early glimpse of the game.
Explaining how the controls would work on an Xbox controller, and showed lots of great touches, from the authentic sound effects on the guns to a new aircraft in the Halo universe exclusive to the game. They even showed a moment where Warthogs, a four-wheel vehicle known very well to fans of the Halo games, were shown flying over a cliff to help out on a fight on the other side. Fans came away from E3 very hyped for Halo Wars. And I myself can attest to this. I remember watching this trailer, being a huge fan of both Halo games and RTS games, and feeling like this was a perfect marriage of two things I loved. It turns out, similar to many other demos we have seen in recent years, they weren't running the demo on actual coding from the game. Everything had been done by hand, the enemies fighting had been programmed exactly what to do, and the AI wasn't even thinking for itself in real time. Of course, the audience at E3 didn't know this, and the game looked extremely impressive. The team working on Halo Wars felt re-energized, going off positive fan feedback from the event. They were excited to get back to work and make the great game everyone was expecting from them. But the Halo Wars team still was understaffed. The Diablo clone that Ensemble was working on was officially cancelled by Microsoft, but most of the team still didn't want to work on another RTS. So they simply moved over to the Halo MMO, which Microsoft still hadn't signed off on. And while Devine and his small team had been working on the game for years with a specific vision in mind, when the new people came on, including Dave Pottinger, a senior designer who had worked on the Age games, they kept bringing in new ideas that clashed with the smaller team's previous vision. This led to some pretty contentious fights. Devine said, quote, "Not yelling fights, but loud fights. It's funny, it's always around game things. Should the economy be cheaper or should the economy be more expensive? Should bases be freestanding or bases all be connected together? It's all good stuff. It's not, oh my gosh, your t-shirt is terrible. It's all just awesome stuff that makes the game much better. But at the time, it's highly stressful." Eventually, however, this proved too much. Devine decided that he would step down as lead designer and just focus on the story. He left the design portion of the game to Dave Pottinger, figuring one unified vision would be better for the development of the game. Even though Devine had been working on Halo Wars for upwards of 2 years, and Pottinger had just joined Halo Wars shortly before. Pottinger instantly gutted a lot of what Devine had done to the game, altering almost all of the units, replacing a sprawling base building system with prefabricated bases that had a set number of slots. He completely changed the resource structure of the game, and lastly, he added a Select All Units button, which the team had resisted for a long time. Quote, "I took over the design, and Graham kept doing the story stuff, which was a full-time job. And he did a great job at that." It was around this time that Microsoft discovered how much of Ensemble's resources were being pulled into creating their Halo MMO, when they should have had all hands on deck for Halo Wars. Colt McCandless, the graphic designer mentioned earlier, said, quote, "It was very common for people from Microsoft to show up and go, 'What the fuck is this? Why are you working on that?' I remember there were some key meetings I was in where people were like, 'We didn't know you guys were putting resources on this. We thought these resources were over there.'" Finally, the word came down from Microsoft to cancel the Halo MMO. They wanted more resources funneled into finishing Halo Wars, which had been delayed into 2008. It should also be noted that the Xbox 360 was selling extremely well at the time, and the Halo MMO was planned as a PC exclusive. The whole situation led some executives at Microsoft to wonder if they really needed to keep paying for the now 100 plus employees at Ensemble Studios, who hadn't shipped a game since Age of Empires 3 back in 2005. One day in September of 2008, all of Ensemble staff were told to come to the studio's auditorium. They instantly knew something was up as they saw Microsoft employees in the room. Ensemble CEO Tony Goodman stood up and made the announcement that after completing Halo Wars, Ensemble Studios would be closing. Obviously, a lot of the studio took it hard. Colt McCandless said, quote, "I flipped the fuck out. My wife and I had just gotten pregnant for the very first time, and our baby was due at the end of January, which was supposed to be the exact date the company was supposed to close. We had a newborn that was supposed to be delivered the day I was no longer supposed to have a job." Two brothers who worked for the company, Paul and David Bettner, immediately quit Ensemble. They went and founded their own studio, New Toy, and created a mobile game called Words with Friends. In 2001, Zynga purchased them for $53.3 million. Adding to the terrible morale of the studio was the realization that not everybody would be out of the job after shipping Halo Wars. Tony Goodman had secured an agreement with Microsoft to keep some of Ensemble staff and start a new studio called Robot Entertainment, which would go on to make the Orcs Must Die and Hero Academy series. The catch was that only half of the studio would be making the jump, so every day was filled with employees asking each other if they had received an email securing them their job. Devine, who was sent on a press tour for Halo Wars, had to dodge any questions about Ensemble's closure. Quote, "I remember pieces of paper being put in front of me by Microsoft telling me, 'This is what you can say.'" The push to the finish line was brutal. Chris Rippey said, quote, "There were great days, like nothing had ever happened and nothing was happening. And there were depressing days. But it was a prideful group, and everybody wanted to do a great job, and everybody knew this was kind of the studio's legacy, and wanted to do something to represent the studio properly." Dave Pottinger said the thing that he was the most proud of was that when the closure of Ensemble Studios was announced to the team, apart from the 3 people who quit that day, everyone else stayed on to finish the game, harkening back to the true feeling the team originally had of being a close-knit family. Finally, on February 26, 2009, Halo Wars was released to the public. It had a fairly positive critical response and currently sits at an 82 on Metacritic. IGN's review at the time said, quote, "Halo Wars deftly dodges between the hardcore micromanagement of real-time strategy and the instant gratification expected by Halo fans. Ensemble has nailed console RTS controls, but at the expense of some depth. Overall, Halo Wars is a fresh and expertly polished approach to the console strategy genre, and it's a fitting goodbye from a beloved studio." And while somewhat lost to time, Halo Wars has a big enough fan base that Microsoft published a sequel made in 2017 titled Halo Wars 2. This game was made by Creative Assembly, a British-based studio responsible for a lot of games in the Total War franchise. And even though half of Ensemble went on to form the aforementioned Robot Entertainment, some of the big names mentioned in this video were scattered to the wind. Graham Devine now works for Magic Leap, a company that has seen incredible investments for its hardware on augmented reality. Dave Pottinger went on to create Bonus XP, a development studio that just recently put out both Stranger Things 3 the game and the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance Tactics. Angelo Loudon is a game developer for People Fun, a mobile gaming company who created the game Wordscapes, which, if you have a phone, I'm sure you've at least seen an ad for. Colt McCandless is now a developer advocate at Google, seemingly making sure no developers get put in tense situations like the one at Ensemble. And Rich Geldrich consults on video games and is a co-founder for Binomial, an image/texture compression product used in video games and video streaming services. And Rich Geldrich has been fairly open about the whole situation as of late on his Twitter. In fact, on Christmas of 2019, he posted a long feed responding to a question on why he thinks Ensemble was closed, saying that at 45 employees, Ensemble was perfect. The team was handpicked and were truly experts at the top of their game. But the growth to 100 employees was sloppier and over doubled the expense of Ensemble for Microsoft. Additionally, he confirmed that Ensemble's heads had been lying to Microsoft about how much manpower was being put into Halo Wars, when instead it was being diverted into the prototype games. He still considers it a blunder by Microsoft to dissolve Ensemble though, citing that Microsoft has been working incredibly hard to find other studios to resurrect the Age of Empires series, even having to hire ex-Ensemble members to get Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition completed. And it seems to me that Age of Empires 4 has been pretty hush-hush, and that the game might be going through some development problems. Halo Wars was truly an ambitious game, fitting a control scheme no one thought possible to its genre, forcing an intellectual property onto a project that was already a year in development, the creator of that IP wanting nothing to do with the game, and none of this is to mention the internal politics at Ensemble, which saw a tiny team laboring on a big game for years before suddenly forcing all hands on deck for a final death march before the game's release. And despite all of this, Ensemble and the team behind Halo Wars were able to make a game that people still cherish to this day. Thank you very much for watching this video on Halo Wars. This has been a huge project of mine that I've been working on since September, so I'm really glad to finally get it out the door. Speaking of, this is the first video that I put out since I quit my job. If you wanted to support me in any way, consider subscribing to this channel and giving the video a like. Like I said earlier, any engagement greatly improves the video's visibility on YouTube. Also, I've started a Patreon where you can support me financially in return for some bonus content. Any help is super appreciated and never expected. I also do a weekly show where me and a panel of guests talk about the week's current gaming news called Around the Monitor, which we showcase live on my Twitch channel, which I'll put a link to below, and you can join our Discord and chat along with us live during the show. We love having an active chat, joining us and giving us their opinions on everything, so consider stopping in and saying hi. Also, a huge shout out to Jason Schreier and his book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. I swear I'm not being paid to support this right now, but basically the entire story for this was inspired by a chapter in this book, and if you enjoyed development stories like this, each chapter in the book is a different game's development story, the problems it faced, the struggles, the solutions, the triumph. It's really fantastic. I might go back to this for another video. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. I'm really looking forward to the next few months and seeing how many videos I can put out with no job to hold me back. But until next time, thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful day.